Welcome to the Alisa Childers podcast, where we equip Christians to identify the core beliefs of historic Christianity, discern its counterfeits, and proclaim the gospel with clarity, kindness, and truth. And today we are joined by Ann Kennedy, who is my favorite writer, and she is a great thinker about current events, especially as they surround things like Exvangelical, deconstruction. She has been in this fight for many, many years, for decades, actually. And so the observations that she's been making lately on social media about the Exvangelical movement have been very insightful, very wise. And so I wanted to have her on to talk about those. We've just gotten off the call, and it was a great conversation. And some highlights for me was when we talked about what does it mean when people sort of accuse evangelicals of being the white evangelical church. What does that term even really mean? Where is it coming from? And Anne had some really great insights on that question. We talked about a new book that's really striking a chord with a lot of people called The Exvangelicals, Loving, Living, and Leaving the White Evangelical Church by Sarah McCammon. And this is a book, like I said, that's really striking a chord. And Anne has read it and is reviewing it for the Christian Research Journal. And I read an article about it. I haven't read the book myself, but I really felt like what was articulated in this article is sort of the bullseye of what I see in the deconstruction movement. Like, this is the formula of deconstruction. And so we discussed that a little bit to help everybody listening to kind of have an idea of when you see your friends and loved ones deconstruct, like what's really going on with them. And so we talked about that, and we talked about some of the theological battles in the church right now, some trends that Anne sees that are leaving churches very vulnerable, issues where churches really need to take positions on right now and stand up to avoid having the kind of splits that she went through with the Anglican Church many years ago. So without any further ado, here's Ann Kennedy. Well, Ann Kennedy, it's so exciting to have you on the podcast again. I think you were on long time ago before we were on video. We did an audio podcast about your writing about people like, I think it was Jen Hatmaker at the time, and other progressive women. And you continue to be, and I've said this before, my favorite writer. You are absolutely my favorite writer.
Wow, thank you.
So, I mean, every day when your little, blog comes into my email, it just fills my heart with so much joy to see what Anne is thinking about what's going on in the world. And so I noticed that you've gotten in a bit of a dust up on Twitter. I'm not really on Twitter, but people sometimes will be like, hey, here's what's happening on Twitter today. And they'll send me little things. And you made the Babylon Bee one of the things they were talking about. And it got me thinking, I really want to have you on to talk about Exvangelical, because this is something you've been kind of not just dipping your toe in, but you've been diving in this pool for a while. And I think you have some incredible insights to offer our audience on this whole Exvangelical kind of phenomenon. But before we do that, for anybody who's unfamiliar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're a busy mom. You have an entire gaggle of kids. So talk about your family and what you do.
Oh, well, thank you. Writing is my most favorite thing in the world, so that anybody would read me is really wonderful. So thank you for that. Yeah, I have 6 kids, 2 in college. I'm about to graduate 2 more, and then I'll have 2 high schoolers left over next year, starting high
Wow.
school. So my life is really crazy. And because I think kids, when they're little, I've discovered this, this is very wicked to say, but you can control their movements. You know where they are, you know what they need, you can meet all their needs, and then suddenly they grow into adults, but they still want to live in your house and eat your food, and a lot of want your input more than maybe you want to give it. So I have a lot of uh, I'm trying to fit in my life around my kids.
Mm.
And but it's great. It's really fun. And my husband and I are in a small Anglican church up here in upstate New York, or downstate New York, and we've been here for over 20 years now. We're not from here, but we've come to make it home, and our kids think that this is home. So I
Yeah.
guess that's how it works.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do church, and I drive people around in the car all day long. That's what I
So
do.
you have a lot of time to think. So how does your
Yeah.
writing process work? You just kind of go on Twitter and think, "Oh, that's crazy. I'm going to write about that today." I don't know where you come with
Yeah.
this endless well of observations and insights. It's really amazing to me.
Well, there's a lot of fodder on Twitter, and I keep thinking, "Oh, I should I should get off Twitter and find somewhere else to find crazy things, but Twitter delivers every day. So
Mm,
I really don't have to scroll too much, but also people send me things every day saying, "Did you see this?" And I'm good for a good reaction. I can react really well or overreact maybe to the crazy out there that's just publicly for all of us to see about what people are thinking and feeling in the Christian world, in the world in general. It's an amazing time to be alive and online.
mm,
And so, yeah, I try to discipline myself, but I have to write with a constant stream of interruptions from
mm.
basically adult children. So if it's scattered
Wow.
and I spell badly, I'm really sorry. It's because
Well,
many
I love
people
the
are
way you,
talking.
yes, and I love the way you express yourself, just the way that you're able to frame your thoughts, and we'll definitely give people information as to where they can connect with you on your blog, which you blog daily, right?
I am on Substack 5 days a week, and then I blog one day at Patheos, and I try to hit our blog on Stand Firm one time on Sundays. And so I try to take Saturday off to catch up. So
Yeah,
that's
it's good.
that's yeah,
Yeah.
almost every day.
Well, the
A lot of
post that
content.
yes, that is a lot of content. It's a lot of writing. So the post that caught my attention, and this is when I was like, "Oh, I've got to have Anne back on," is it was who was it that maybe I can't remember if you did the original or it was somebody else, but the gist of it was somebody had gone on Twitter and said, I grew up Southern Baptist. My parents, had a Bush and Cheney sign on the yard, and I was taught to memorize scripture. I can't remember the list of things. And then they said,
Mhm.
and you know what? I'm fine. And
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was almost
yeah,
like the anti-exvangelical post. And
yeah.
then you came in and made a really insightful comment about when you're reading exvangelical books, it's kind of like this disconnection from history. It's like a disconnection from a respect for elders, and you
Mhm.
you specifically pointed that out. So talk a little bit about that thread and kind of what the response was. It seemed like a lot of people then came in the thread and were saying, "Yeah, I grew up this way, and I was taught that Jesus died for my sins. I was baptized. I went to church camp. I did all these things, and you know what? I'm fine too, and everything's
Mhm.
good, and I'm not traumatized by some of these things." And it was just sort of like, wow, this is really kind of refreshing.
Yeah. Well, I think it was our week after Easter. Maybe it was the day after Easter, so I probably shouldn't have been on the internet. But I don't tweet much. I'm more of a lurker, and I said the thing that really bothers me or irritates me about so many exvangelical deconstructing works is that there's a theme of disrespect for parents and an incuriosity about theology.
Yeah.
And so there's a claim that everybody's curious about theology, but I've found that it actually is pretty lacking. And so then, yeah, it kind of took off from there. And a lot of people in the first round were very agreeing. Yes, I had a evangelical childhood, and my parents were great, and I went to Awana or whatever, marked I wanted to say marked safe from,
Yeah.
spiritual emphasis week. I grew
Right.
up in a evangelical world. I kind of was between 2 worlds, but I lived in the evangelical world and in the purity culture world, and I'm a Christian. I love the Lord. I'm really, really grateful for the people who went before me and who invested in me even when I didn't understand, where they were coming from. I might not have enjoyed all of it at the time, but I'm so grateful. And that lack of gratitude is just, I think, very markedly missing from exvangelical works and deconstructing works. And yeah, the second and third rounds of the comments and the quote tweets and that kind of stuff were, well, you've never read any evangelicals, you don't know what you're talking about, you're a very, very wicked person. But I
Mhm.
enjoyed that too. I found it was pretty fun to see how the waves of reactions come in on Twitter.
Yeah, and
Right.
it's not I'm not even on Twitter, but it is breathtaking how many assumptions people will make about you. Like
Mhm.
they will say,
Mhm.
"Oh, look, you had this faith crisis, all this stuff happened, and now you have the exact same theology as you had before you started." And I want to just be like, "Wow, like how do you
Yeah.
even know that?" Because there's a lot of theological positions I hold that I don't take a public position on. So how could you
Mhm.
possibly know what they are? And then other people will just assume that I believe this or I believe this because of the
Mhm.
paradigm that they grew up in, or perhaps the stream
Mhm.
of evangelicalism that they grew up in. They just assume that maybe I would hold the same positions as the ones they grew up in. So
Mhm.
I think that lends itself to the
Mhm.
incuriosity about theology that
Mhm.
you so insightfully pointed out. Because if they were genuinely curious, you'd think they would say, well, what is your position on X, Y, or
Right.
Z? And not just assume that all people who would call themselves evangelicals are just this monolith and this block that all think exactly the same, because
Mhm.
we certainly don't. I mean, you and I, you're Anglican, I'm Southern
Mhm.
Baptist. There's going to be some points of disagreement between us on
Mhm.
certain things, but there's this core
Mhm.
gospel message that you and we rally around and go, we're sisters in Christ because of this, and
Mhm.
we can have those other discussions. But I am curious, like I'm totally curious about what you believe about all these different things that I don't necessarily know.
Mhm.
And so you also pointed out a lack of gratefulness. That's a very interesting thing. Now, I do want people to know, like before we get too deep into this side of things, Anne has been in this pool, swimming in this pool for years and years and years. I mean, you were kind of in on the first round of the Anglican Church splitting over this kind of theology.
Mhm.
You've been in the fight ever since. So you're not coming to this from a position of like, oh, I'm going to clutch my pearls because all these evangelicals are saying these things all of a sudden. I mean, this is a
Mhm.
battle you've been in for a long time. Talk about that a little bit. When you were sort of you were Anglican when the Anglican Church was splitting over this stuff. Talk about that.
Mm. Right. I like to say I'm an Anglican of the Anglicans, born of Anglicans. My parents became Anglican when I was before I was born, and I was baptized in the Diocese of Oxford in England on their way to West Africa, where so I grew up as a missionary kid in the sort of missionary world of Christian Missionary Alliance, Conservative Baptist, Southern Baptist world of other missionaries, but also as an Anglican from birth. And so I lived a double life, sometimes in Anglican churches in the US and then in Africa, just a lot of the wonderful missionary community of evangelical people working together across denominational lines. So just at the same time, a lot of my friends from boarding school have left the faith, and
Mm,
so there is a big trend. These books that come out, like the deconstructing work that's being done, is having a huge impact on people who grew up in the faith. So that's why I think it's worth really delving into what are the trends, what are they saying, why are they saying it. But yes, then I was went to church through college, went to the Episcopal chaplaincy at my college, and met my husband. We were both Episcopalian, and then we came to upstate New York to serve a small Episcopal church. And within 1 year, our denomination, the Episcopal Church, uh, decided to embrace the sort of affirming agenda as we know it now, but
mhm,
they decided to ordain a, a man as bishop who was in an open relationship with another man at the time in 2003. And our bishop up here in New York, all the bishops of the church have to agree. And so they kind of implicate themselves by their own agreement in consecrating new bishops. And so our bishop agreed, and then we were launched into this years long, slow split from our denomination, eventually formed the Anglican Church in North America. And we dealt with the sexuality issue through our ministry from the first day we walked into the church, really,
mhm.
as very young people. Not that we're very old now, but we've been at it for a long time. And when we finally lost, we were sued by the Episcopal Church and lost our church building, our rectory, all the church finances in 2009. And we have a story of God's grace in wonderful provision through that. But it 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 at the time we said in 2009, we're really jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, because what we've just had, the whole culture is going to face. The whole
Mm,
American church is going to face what we have dealt with now. And I hoped, I prayed back then that other churches, the SBC, the CMA, the Presbyterians, everyone would look at what happened to the Episcopal Church and see the caution, take heed, take warning, and take steps at the time
mm,
to, you know, be on their guard and build up, back up the bulwarks. And nobody did. I mean, maybe it's here and there, but it has been tragic and interesting to see other churches just face the same exact thing that we did
mm.
and not quite know what to do, when I think it's clear what you should do. But uh,
Yeah.
it's the same thing again.
The 4th of July is right around the corner, and if you're planning on having a backyard barbecue and you go to the store to buy your meat, you're going to notice that prices are up, quality is down, and there are more imports than ever. This is a great time to try Good Ranchers. In fact, goodranchers.com is the #1 place to buy 100% American meat for this uniquely American holiday. So celebrate with savory meats that are delivered right to your door, that are all born, raised, and made right here in the USA. So whether you're having a barbecue, maybe a pool party, bonfire, Good Ranchers has you covered. In fact, right now, you can save on Good Ranchers meat like never before. You can subscribe to any Good Ranchers box now and get $100 off plus free smoked brats for a year. And these brats are so good. I've had them and they're absolutely delicious. Now, this $100 off is going to be spread out over the course of your first 3 boxes. You'll get $40 off your first box and $30 off your next 2 boxes. But this is more than just a great deal. It's a chance to celebrate America by supporting American family farms and enjoying the highest quality American meat. So all you have to do to claim this offer is go to goodranchers.com, subscribe to any of their custom curated boxes filled with 100% American beef, chicken, pork, or wild-caught seafood. Use my code Alisa at checkout to claim your $100 off and free smoked brats for a year. You're also going to get free shipping on all your orders. Now, if you needed any other reason to support Good Ranchers, not only are they great partners of this show, but they support the paralyzed veterans of America. So every order saves American farms and supports American veterans. So change the way you buy meat today. Go to goodranchers.com. Use my code Alisa to claim your $100 off, plus your free brats for a year and free shipping. Again, that's goodranchers.com. Use my code Alisa. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. Over the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity 2 or 3 times now. One was actually a Presbyterian church where the pastor was the only one on the board of his leadership. You know, I'm not Presbyterian, so I'm not sure exactly. Presbytery, right? What's the word? That sounds good.
Maybe. Yeah, that
But
sounds
he
good.
was the only one that was advocating for biblical ethics when it came to sexuality, and he was the pastor of a church and ended up getting voted out. The whole thing went to court, lost the church, and he and his wife were out on the street basically for
Wow.
upholding the line on biblical sexuality. And then 2 or 3 of the others have been United Methodist churches who are contending for their denomination right now, and
Yeah.
some were in the
Yeah.
process already of disaffiliating. One had successfully disaffiliated and ended up getting to keep their building, but the whole thing went through the courts. It was just this big
Mhm.
fiasco, and it's happening right now.
Mhm.
And so this isn't your first rodeo. I mean, I think that you're
Mhm.
uniquely positioned to be able to look out into culture and say, hey, these are the things we need to be concerned about. And you mentioned trends, and you mentioned that there are things that churches can take steps to be on their guard about. What are you seeing right now in our culture where you're going, oh, this is a bad road? If these specific churches don't be on their guard and take steps and speak out against whatever these things are, this is
Mhm.
going to take them down a bad road. What are you seeing happen right now?
I think a lot of it is sort of I mean, just this sort of aesthetic language that it is appearing. That maybe that's not a good word for it, but most lately, I've been really frustrated hearing people talk about how they embrace a biblical sexual ethic, and so therefore you should trust them. But they
Mm,
use biblical sexual ethic with this sort of ginger, uh, anxious tone, like, or embarrassed. It's not a full-throated, wholesale, embrace and exposition of what it means to be a person, and what sexuality is, and what the Bible is, and why what God says in the Bible about human sexuality is beautiful. It's instead there's this, well, yeah, we embrace it, but we just want to take 2 or 3 steps back. We're super apologetic. We're willing to say sorry for God being, I mean, we can't say he's a bigot, but we feel bad that he said these things. We know they're good, but we don't feel they're good, and we're not willing to um, stand up in a public space and say that they're beautiful.
Yeah, we're gonna call them
And
clobber passages.
yes, right, clobber passages, and we're going to say that parts of the Bible are abusive, or that God doesn't really understand women, or he does love you, but you're not going to feel loved by him because of these terrible texts of terror and clobber
Mm.
passages that are in there. And so that is the thing that makes me most concerned, because if you're going to feel embarrassed about the Bible, and you're not going to love what God commands, and you're not going to be able to account for difficult things like the conquest of Canaan or other violent acts, if you don't have any paradigm to understand um, sexual sin in the Bible and how it's used in the text, what it's for, then you're not going to survive the oncoming tsunami.
Mm.
And you're going to be the first to fall down. And I think we're seeing that right now. People are just kind of falling over before the tidal wave of the culture. And
Yeah.
that's tragic, because the scriptures are the words of life, and they always have been. They were the words of life 20 years ago, and 50 years ago, and 100 years ago, and when they were written. It's not like something changed just now. What changed is that we are embarrassed, because we don't remember. They never spoke to us. I mean, I'm using us
Mhm.
not include myself here, but
Yeah.
they should speak to you. And if they don't speak to you in a way that you can hear and feel your life changed, then you aren't going to survive
Mm.
the coming apocalypse.
Mm. Okay, so you mentioned just at the very beginning of that answer something that brought to mind several conversations I've had with people where maybe there's an organization or a pastor or even a church who seems iffy on sexuality, and everybody's kind of like,
Mhm,
well, it sounds like they're promoting biblical marriage, but
mhm,
then there's this other stuff where they're like okay with using pronouns and
mhm,
calling
mhm,
people gay or as an identity category. And then but I wanna take it a little further, because then they'll say, "Well, but I wrote them, or I called them, or I spoke with somebody, and I said, I have these concerns, X, Y, or Z, and then but they told me, 'It's okay, we have a biblical sexual ethic, no worries.'"
right.
And that was, like, good enough for them.
Mhm,
In
right.
several of these conversations I've had, and it's like I wanna say to everybody, "That's nice, but you have to ask more questions. What
Mhm,
is the biblical sexual ethic? What does that
mhm,
mean? What does that mean when it comes to who we are? What is our core identity? What is a sin? What isn't a sin? Where does sin begin?" I mean, we are in the weeds of these
mhm,
distinctions now. We cannot just kind of take someone's word for it. Oh yeah, yeah, no,
mm-mm,
we have a biblical sexual ethic, because um, everybody thinks that what they think is quote unquote biblical, or at least they want to say that it is. But
mhm.
we have to ask more questions, don't we?
We have to ask so many questions, and we have to be, I think, theologically astute and nuanced enough to understand, to be able to hear what's being said when somebody says something, because there's layers and layers of meaning. And so there's ways that things can be communicated. And you're right, I think that people use that biblical sexual ethic as this wall that sort of should insulate them from more questions. But the questions you should ask are really, yeah, what is God's view of the Bible? What was the pre-fall vision of humanity?
Mm,
What was God's design for men and women before the fall? and then what happened with the fall and what happened afterwards, because there's a whole lot of bad stuff thrown in there. Just in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, uh, people are that's a place where, like, smoke is thrown, and
Mm-hmm.
people say things that sound true but are not true. And then you get through to the entire rest of the Bible, but there's key passages where you should be able to ask questions that would actually illumine what somebody thinks, and then you can know, oh, well, they're not really serious, and maybe they don't know what they're talking about. Like, maybe
Yeah.
they think something that's actually just been debunked 20 years ago. Um, maybe it's bad scholarship. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's a I think true Christians should educate themselves and should have gain a listening ear for some of just the small throwaway lines, the confusion that's thrown in, the statements that are made with nothing backing them up, which is
Mm-hmm.
how I would say most of the book that comes to mind is Beth Allison Barr's book. She just made like huge sweeping claims about things in the Bible that were
Yeah.
easily and church history that were easily shown to be false, but most people just didn't know
Yeah.
anything, and so they accepted her. They took her word for it. You should never
Mm-hmm.
take anyone's word for it anymore.
Yeah. If you've been listening to this show for any amount of time, you know how much I love 7 Weeks Coffee, because this is a coffee company that is unapologetically Christian and pro-life. In fact, they named their coffee company 7 Weeks because at 7 weeks, the baby in the womb is the size of a coffee bean, and this is when the heartbeat is first detectable. Now, last time I asked you guys to help 7 Weeks Coffee reach their goal of donating $400,000 to pro-life resource pregnancy centers all over the country, and you did it. They made that goal. They have now to date donated over $400,000. And that's because when you drink 7 Weeks Coffee, you help save lives, because they donate 10% of every sale to pro-life pregnancy care centers. Now, this is upwards of 50% of their profits. This is unheard of, how generous they are to the pro-life cause. Now, not only is the cause great, the coffee is great. In fact, it's as clean as coffee gets. So the 7 Weeks Coffee is mold and toxin free. They have organic farming practices. It's ultra low acid, and they actually pay their farmers 300% more than fair trade coffee requires. So it's so good, and the quality is good, but also the ethics are good. And I love 7 Weeks Coffee. I get my espresso beans every month through the Heartbeat Club, which is their subscription service. You can check that out, or maybe just try a pound and see if you like it. If you go to 7weekscoffee.com and use my code Alisa, you're going to get an additional 15% off of every order when you subscribe. So again, go to 7weekscoffee.com, use my code Alisa. Yeah, and a perfect example of this is when I had a team of people reading through Richard Rohr's Universal Christ and chasing down all the footnotes. And it was astonishing how, in some cases, he would quote from quote unquote the Bible,
Mhm,
and they couldn't find the translation anywhere.
mhm,
The one thing about the internet is you can search things pretty thoroughly like that, and they couldn't find the
mhm,
wording anywhere. There were other times when he would say, well, this was my translation. And as far as I know, Richard Rohr is not a Hebrew or Greek scholar. Or there would be just a complete misapplication or misinterpretation of
mhm,
whatever scripture he was using. And so you really do have to chase down those footnotes, because I have just honestly found people to footnote things wrongly quite
mhm,
often. So, I mean, and it sounds overwhelming, I'm sure, to somebody listening to us, but there's so much misinformation on the internet, and all it takes is somebody to say something enough times, and few enough, and just enough people who might have
mhm,
some credibility accept it and start saying. And this happens in scholarship as well.
mhm,
We've seen this
mhm,
happen as well. But you brought up the Beth Allison Barr book, and that's kind of how that seems like that wave of books, like Jesus and John Wayne and others would go, is they would kind of construct this historical narrative that was very skewed in a certain way, and then build a worldview on top of that narrative that
mhm,
really wasn't even necessarily accurate to begin with. And so that brings me a little bit to this exvangelical sort of it's a slippery term. It's something that I have struggled to really understand because it's obvious that it doesn't just mean I'm not evangelical anymore. Because you could have somebody who maybe grew up, I don't know, Southern Baptist, solidly evangelical, and then they do a bunch of study and they become a more maybe traditional kind of Lutheran, and they're not going to use the Exvangelical hashtag.
Mhm.
The Exvangelical hashtag really does mean a specific something, but it's sort of built upon what people think the word evangelical means. And what was so difficult for my co-author Tim and I in our deconstruction book to do was even to define that, to define evangelical, because as Carl
Mhm.
Trueman pointed out in his book, The Real Scandal of the Evangelical Mind, I think it was called, is that you don't have an evangelical mind because you don't even have evangelical. There's not like this agreed upon definition of what that word even means.
Mhm.
And so you have things like Bebbington's quadrilateral, which emphasizes the cross, personal conversion, biblical authority, and evangelism.
Mhm.
But then you also have the ex-evangelicals who just basically see a MAGA hat when they when they think
Mhm.
of evangelical. So talk about like how would you describe maybe evangelical and ex-evangelical to somebody who's just like, what is happening? Like, why are my friends that I grew up in church going on social media and saying they're reevaluating things and then they're using that hashtag ex-evangelical?
Yeah, well, I took umbrage in the Jesus and John Wayne book with that she decided to say that evangelical meant essentially it was like a political term, and it was pop culture inflected, and it was what evangelicals liked to consume from media and that kind of thing. It was
Mm,
basically an economic term or a cultural one. And at the time, I was deeply irritated by that because sure, there are many different evangelical subcultures. There are uh, there's certainly Christian pop culture and media, and there are certain recognizable tropes amongst Protestant American Christians that are not mainline. And so I think most Christians in America can go from one church to another, regardless of the denomination, and understand what's going on pretty easily. They'll recognize the music, they'll be able to track with the sermon, they'll understand the scripture being read, they'll understand that there's a greeting time afterwards, and there's not this huge culture shock across denominations within the United States. So I think you could before use the term evangelical, and it really did mean something spiritual. It really did mean common cause, a real understanding of the gospel and the scriptures shared across many, many, many churches. I, as an Episcopalian, could have gone to a Baptist church in the 80s and been perfectly comfortable. Of course, as an Episcopalian, our sermons were very short and we had a lot of extra other stuff. And a Baptist sermon is very long and the music didn't perfectly align. But I, as a Christian, was well able to get it and, uh, be conversant with the people in those churches. So I don't think that it's really fair to say that there's no like it's not recognizable what is an evangelical. Of course, the term is becoming corrupted and it's taken on a lot of water that it probably should never have had to carry. And part of that, I think, is because people want to make it an unusable word. They want to make it so that none of us can call ourselves evangelical. But one of the greatest markers of an evangelical was somebody who wanted to share their faith with other people, or at least understood that they should want to, even if they
mhm,
were deeply embarrassed about it. So you might never want to share your faith, but you would know that that was a good thing to do, and you would accept the idea that Jesus died for sinners and that all people should hear that saving news.
mhm,
So it does have this missionary aspect to it, this going out. Um, and so maybe that's what marks it as differentiates it from the main lines, which probably, as an Episcopalian, a lot of bishops would say, don't worry about going out. just open your doors and people will come in. And we always hoped that was true, but it wasn't. You have to
Yeah.
go out and invite people in. And that's a sort of an evangelical thing to do. And so there's so many great organizations that were founded by evangelicals, like Young Life and um, local, but missionaries abroad that were compelled by evangelicalism and English evangelicalism. As an Anglican, there's a really strong evangelical uh, movement within my historically in my church, that's still there as we've recovered ourselves. We're still
Yeah.
deeply evangelical about our faith. And it is interesting as I think the exvangelical movement that's growing still has that kind of missionary zeal, though it wants to say that there's no content. Really, what they're propagating, what they're trying to proselytize, is not belief in God, but trust and acceptance of the self. So
Mm.
it's an interesting and ironic perversion, but I think the base sort of um, impulse is still there uh, for evangelicals. I'm sure they would
Yeah.
hate for me to say that.
I am commonly asked what type of curriculum I would recommend for homeschool families or even for churches that want to implement something that is very biblically solid and informed from a Christian worldview. And I can't recommend Foundation Worldview highly enough. They have a new curriculum coming out called God's Good Design. And I've actually had the opportunity to review some of this curriculum, and I am so impressed with what they've come up with. It's 30 video-based lessons on God's good design for identity, gender, sexuality, marriage, and family. Now, these lessons are easy to implement. You just print the activity sheet and you press play. And it also includes multiple activities per lesson that engage children's minds and bodies with biblical truth. So this curriculum covers topics such as image bearing, gender, love, friendship, marriage, family, sin, transgenderism, abuse, pornography, homosexuality, divorce, and redemption. So if you as a parent have been struggling with knowing how to talk to your kids about these topics, check out God's Good Design curriculum from Foundation Worldview. Children are going to walk away with a biblical understanding of what God's design is and why we should follow it. Sensitive topics are approached gently and biblically, helping children grasp the truth without becoming overwhelmed. And then parents become the first ones to cover these sensitive topics with their children. So in their children's minds, parents become the experts and the one your kids are going to turn to with their questions. So check out Foundation Worldview. Go to foundationworldview.com. Again, that's foundationworldview.com. Well, I have found that it almost doesn't matter what we say.
Mhm,
Because there have been times when
mhm,
I felt like I was actually defending evangelicals in one sense because, Christians, like well-meaning evangelical Christians would use the word
mhm,
deconstruction like in a healthy way, just
mhm,
deconstruct in a healthy way. And then the evangelicals and the deconstructionists are like, that's dumb. Why, don't take
mhm.
our word. And then when I said, yeah, let's not take their word, they still hate it. They still hate everything
Right,
I say. So it doesn't matter.
right,
But
right.
somebody sent me an article about a woman named Sarah McCammon, I believe it is, and she's written a book called Exvangelicals, which it's called Loving, Living, and Leaving the White Evangelical Church, the Exvangelicals. And this is a book that is, I thought we could discuss because you've read it. You're actually reviewing it for
Mhm,
Christian Research Journal, I believe.
mhm. That's
And
right.
this book has really, I think, struck a chord with a lot of people. Somebody sent me an article about her that was on NPR. And as I read the article, I thought, oh, this is like the playbook. This is the exact deconstruction. Um, this is the formula. Like everything she's saying in here,
Mhm,
everything from her angst over Donald Trump, her accusation of whatever white evangelicalism is. I still don't
mhm,
necessarily know what that is because if you really think about it, really, in the Protestant church, you have the main lines, which are liberal, which are progressive, right?
mhm,
And then, or at least this is how Aaron Renn in his book, The Negative World, Life in the Negative World,
mhm, mhm,
parses it out. It's like you have the main lines, and then you have evangelical, which is going to be more like you've described, biblically based, deep understanding of the gospel. Of course, there's other people who identify themselves as evangelical that are
Mhm.
doing wacky, crazy things. And then you have like Black Protestant church, which a lot of the Black Protestant church doesn't also, like the mainlines, have a biblical worldview. So it's sort of like we're stuck in this place of now, but we're being called, it's the white evangelical church. First of
Mhm.
all, just give me your thoughts on that phrase, and because that's kind of all over the accusations of why people are leaving, why people are deconstructing. Do you think it's a real thing? White evangelical church? Like, I don't remember signing up for the white evangelical church.
Right, well, I think throwing the word white in there is definitely an attempt to slander all Christians, like, so I think there could definitely be, people who wouldn't identify as white, or you might I don't know. It's such a it's such an offensive way of viewing the world. It's hard to
Yeah.
even talk about it. But so you could have I think you could have a really biblically based evangelical racially diverse church, and they could still be called white
Yeah.
if they believed in the Bible and they had a really true wholehearted biblical sexual ethic, and they refused to be progressive theologically and
Yeah.
politically, they would still be branded white. So sure, I think you could take cultural tropes. Certainly, I do think that in many Black churches in America, they're like 90% Black, who maybe had all the theology of a white church. They might not want to worship together for whatever reason. They might escape this being called white. But I bet if they were really biblically faithful, I bet
Yeah.
ultimately they're also going to be called white. Doesn't matter what your color is. It's not
Yeah.
about your color. It's that you really have one particular view of the scriptures and sexuality, and you think that the gospel has real ramifications for life now, and you believe in a life that goes on forever. You believe in things like literal hell. And so, yes, you're that's what's really offensive is the theology and the culture that flows out of that theology. And if you want to if you want to malign those people and be racist about them and call them white, I guess, you know, go for it. But it and it's not a serious critique
Yeah.
of Christians.
It's
So this is
ubiquitous though.
very
It's
it's
everywhere.
ubiquitous. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so easy. It's just the easiest, laziest, most crowd pleasing
Mm,
way that you could title something the white evangelical church.
mm. That is well put. I'm looking for a quote here because it was on Twitter, and I've got it right here. So it was, I think it was Kristen Dumais. Who was it? Okay, yeah, this is a tweet from Kristen Dumais. She said she's talking about Jacob Allen Cook's book, and she said his book shows quite powerfully that what white evangelicals have labeled the Christian worldview bears a striking resemblance to whiteness. That is, white
Mhm.
centered and white hegemonic ways of viewing and arranging the world and responding to human difference. And then, of course, later when people asked her, like, how she analyzes power structures and how she does that, she says, well, I've spent years reading social and cultural histories of gender, Foucault, Gramsci, Adorno, Habermas, and she doesn't mean Gary Habermas. Um, and I'm just thinking, okay, so this is like basically rooted in Marxism, and
Mhm.
and you're basically calling the what is the biblical worldview
Mhm.
basically white supremacy. And so I think this is where a
Mhm.
lot of this is coming, because I wanted to bring this up because I know so many Christians who are being accused of being the white evangelical church and how it's
Mhm.
so evil and all of these things about it. And they're like, we're just minding our business, trying to live for the Lord. We're trying to, be good people. We're trying to be members of our community. And yet we're being kind of like lumped in this group. And so I
Mhm.
thought this article that I read about her book really sort of walked through that sort of type of thinking. And then, of course, there's always going to be the Trump, the Trump's always in there somewhere.
Mhm.
And then there's purity culture, abuse,
Mhm.
and other things that are brought up. But I'd love for you to just kind of tell us about this book, because I definitely plan on reading it. I have not read it yet myself, but this seems to be the Exvangelical book that's really striking a chord with people. So, what's the general arc of the deconstruction that she's talking about? Does she use the word deconstruction in the book, or does she just kind of talking about leaving evangelicalism?
I think she definitely is. I don't know if she uses the actual word deconstruction, but there's a whole chapter called Unraveling, and in that she because it's her own biography, her own story of herself, her own autobiography, uh,
Mhm.
that she weaves together with other people's stories. And so in Unraveling, she has many different people who sort of found that their worlds were unraveling, which is a good way of talking about deconstruction.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a whole chapter on Jamar Tisby's Leave Loud campaign. There's she uses sort of stock evangelical phrases as the chapter titles, which is pretty clever. Like, uh, uh, "People Need the Lord" is the first one, and "A Virtuous Woman," and "Into the Wilderness." So there, she's very conversant in even jelly speak. Wait, that's
Mhm.
somebody else coined that term who's very
Mhm.
popular on the internet today. But he she the arc is that her own story, she uses her own story to sort of talk through the unraveling that happened in the Trump era from 2016 on. Although I think she was having big doubts before that. Uh, and so she uses her childhood and she went to a Christian school. She grew up with Christian parents, in a sort of charismatic church, and she went to a Christian college. She married a Christian boy from the Christian college, and then somewhere along the way, she began to question all that. And it turned out, and it really, she had questions all the way through, probably, but she had a grandfather who was uh, in a relationship with another man. Um, and she found out about it at one point, and that really set in motion the deconstruction that she uh,
Hmm.
went through. And she
Is it
really
so that
did.
she could affirm him,
I
or
think that was
was
a huge, yeah, she
yeah.
wanted her parents, she grew her earliest memories are of praying for his salvation, not understanding why he wasn't saved, and then at the age of 15 or so, discovering why he's not saved, why he's sort of alienated from the family, and then slowly taking up his cause against that of her parents. And so she slowly breaks her relationship with her parents. Eventually, she gets divorced and she reads out letters that she wrote to them and that they wrote back to her.
Hmm.
It's really heartbreaking.
Hmm.
And then at the very end, well, I shouldn't spoil it, but the end is heartbreaking because the hope that she has for her life is that she'll be able to die like her grandfather did, holding the hand of her grandchild. That's all the hope
Wow.
she has in the world. So it's actually moving. She's a really good writer. She's an excellent writer, and she weaves together her story with other people's stories, and you can see where there's points in her life where she didn't get the answers that she wanted that satisfied her. She put on a good front her whole life, and then at some point, it was really the catalyst when the white evangelical voted for Donald Trump in 2016 or whenever. Um, and the hypocrisy of that made her world come apart. And it
Mhm.
didn't matter how many people said why they voted for him or if they said they didn't vote for him. I know
Yeah.
lots and lots of Christians. I know lots and lots of white evangelicals did not vote for Donald Trump
Yeah.
in 2016. I was one of them who did not vote for him. And that doesn't matter, though, because, they were able to make this um, out group, of almost a majority of Americans. So
Yeah.
that is it's such a great excuse. It has provided an excuse for people who grew up in the church to leave the church and count themselves as righteous before God.
Mm. It's such an interesting insight because I was even having a conversation this last weekend with somebody who was basically saying, I just can't believe that Trump has driven so many people away from the church. And I said, well, okay, I'm not a fan. I don't really like Trump, but what I don't understand is how it logically follows, like, people voted for Trump, therefore Christianity is false.
Yeah.
It just that doesn't compute for me. I don't
Right.
understand the connection. Um, Even it, like you said, there are people who voted for Trump for different reasons. People didn't vote for Trump. People didn't vote the first time, voted the second time, or voted the first
Mhm.
time and didn't the second time. I mean, there's people are individuals with different opinions and thoughts about things. And yeah, there were some wacky stuff that I saw that I was like, ew, I hate that. That's gross.
Mhm.
But but it seemed like there was this push to say, and I do think a lot of this has been the media slandering Christians
Mhm.
too, to say, well, all Christians think this way. Trump is their savior. Like, if you even want to think
Mhm.
about it in any kind of a nuanced way, it's no, no, no. Trump is their savior, and they've abandoned the gospel and conflated the gospel with politics, which seems a lot like the more left-leaning Christians just wanting the more conservative Christians to just shut up about politics while they can be as loud as they want to be about politics. I
Mhm.
mean, I know we're not here to talk about politics, but
Mhm.
it's so hard for me to make the connection myself between, like, okay, let's even say the whole church blundered and they were all just hoodwinked and everybody got on board. That doesn't discount the resurrection of Jesus. Like, I don't
Mhm.
understand how that leads
Yeah.
to letting go of the resurrection and personal salvation and the atoning sacrifice of Jesus and biblical sexual ethics. I don't understand.
Right. I mean, that was really interesting because she definitely comes out in the book as saying, "Well, I don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, and I don't, uh, I don't, I don't believe in hell in particular, and I'm very happy to stop saying that I'm a bad person and that I'm a sinner. I
Yeah,
particularly want to say that I'm not a sinner and my children aren't sinners." And that is really this that sticks in the craw. It turns out then that belief in hell is actually harmful, and if you teach that to
yeah,
your children, you're harming them. There's a whole chapter in here on recovering from trauma and harm from Christian teaching, but it is wrapped up in the package of Trump, and so nobody, has to investigate, I guess, because of this one person who is a political figure, and Christians have thrown in their lot with him or haven't, have made political calculations, maybe even spiritual calculations, and yet the truth claims of Christianity are still there regardless of this one man. And I I kept saying as I read the book, you know, what if you're wrong? What if Jesus really did rise from the dead? What if the Bible it, what if you can know that the Bible is true, which you can?
hmm,
You're willing to just throw it all away because you're angry with your mom and dad um because you're embarrassed by the kind of upbringing that you had. I really think there's a class embarrassment that comes out in this book, which I think was really illuminated in Jesus and John Wayne. Being a white
mm,
evangelical quote is a classless, low class kind of situation to be in. And it does not grant you elite status. It doesn't grant you entrance into the halls of academia or the elite world in any way. It's the worst possible kind of person to be. And and I think people just want to escape that
mm,
feeling of
mm,
shame. It's just that you're
mhm.
doing that at the expense of actual truth. And so that's really tragic. It's a little bit ironic, but it's something that Christians have always been used to enduring from the time of Jesus, who
Yeah,
himself, stepped in the way of shame. And
yeah,
so I just really grieve. I felt real grief for her and many like her in this book, more than I mean, I felt real grief when Rachel Held Evans died,
yeah, same.
because she was really the first. This book is just a recapitulation of the same path that Rachel Held Evans went down,
Yeah,
and that was tragic. Uh, she paved the way. She could not wrap her mind around something beyond herself and her own intellect
mm,
being transcendent, and yet people were all around her saying, God is real and he's right here.
yeah,
Um, and so it's tragic. And I'm hopeful eventually Trump will go away from American politics. And then
mhm,
I think a lot of Christians, we should just stand here. Some of these evangelicals are going to come creeping back because they're going to discover that God is real
mm,
and that they need help. They need to be saved.
Yeah. And I think things have escalated too so much since the time of Rachel Held Evans because, she still was generally pretty respectful to her conservative
Mhm,
parents. She talked
mhm,
about them in a positive way. She would discuss the disagreements they had, but I never got the feeling from reading her books and from following her on social media that she was just like throwing her parents under the bus, like they're these harmful, toxic, traumatic people that taught
mhm,
me all of these harmful doctrines, which is really more what we're seeing now in the
mhm,
Exvangelical hashtag. You mentioned people. I want to swing back to kind of where we started with almost that lack of gratefulness and that lack of respect, because you look in past generations. No, my mom always told me that she's like, everybody's going to end up with mom guilt. You're going to fail your kids. I failed you in
mhm,
ways. You're going to fail your kids in ways, and part of becoming an adult is really just sort of acknowledging that and figuring out the ways you need to forgive your parents for like the
mhm,
ways that they
mhm,
failed, because we all fail. None of us are these perfect parents, but it's almost like this crop of evangelicals and deconstructionists sort of feel like they're the first ones that have figured out how to be a healthy person. And everybody who's come before them is
mhm,
toxic, has harmful worldviews, is not emotionally. I met a lady. She was a sweet lady, and she said that her adult son had disconnected from her and written her a no contact letter because he said that she's spiritually underdeveloped and emotionally immature. And I meet parents night after night after night who have been told, you're harmful, you're toxic,
mhm,
it's unhealthy for me to be in relationship with you, from their adult children. And it's so tragic to me that we've gotten to this point where, I mean, of course, nobody's perfect, but I mean, I would think a parent would have to be pretty bad to totally cut them off. Like it would have
mhm,
to be, you'd have to be so bad. And I
mhm.
just can't believe that this many people are that
Right.
bad, but they're getting cut off. They're getting no contact letters. And boy, when I read the article about this woman in this book, it was like that is in all of my research on deconstruction. That's the formula right there, what I read in that
Mhm.
article.
Yeah, no, I think this is almost the Platonic ideal of
Yeah,
deconstructors, evangelicals. She just writes it to type. If you wanna write the book now, you can just take this as a template and just fill in your own
yeah,
details, and you'll be good to go. And I it is it's I've already said this, but it's very, very easy to be angry and to refuse to forgive the people from
yeah,
who brought you forth into the world. And in some sense, I think the generation that gave birth to my generation um, tried and failed in many ways. But when the command of a parent or of the to the child to obey and honor your parents is a command that parents have to bring about initially for their children. They have to teach them to obey and to honor them,
yeah,
which is embarrassing and weird in our
mm,
culture.
yeah,
But if you fail to do that, you really send the next generation into a pit. And I think that many people did not teach honor. And
mm,
so they are now not receiving honor, but that does not let their children off from the command of giving honor. And so the easiest thing of unforgiveness and dishonor, it's just an easy way out, is taking hold of a whole lot of people. Um and while they're doing that, they're really rejecting the very basis of our civilization, of our
mm,
Western
yeah,
values, because honor and forgiveness are at the base of our Western values. So when you
yeah,
throw those two things away, you're you're willingly going out into a howling wilderness for
mm,
reasons I can't, for very selfish, um, sophomoric reasons. So
yeah,
I uh I just don't recommend that people do that.
yeah.
If you haven't forgiven your parents for hurting you, you should do that immediately.
Yeah, and there's personal responsibility too,
Mhm,
because I know that
mhm,
there have been problems that I've had in my life that were a result of the sin of other people, for sure.
mhm,
But there's also a lot of problems, even interconnected with some of those things, that have to do with my
mhm,
own sin that I have to take personal responsibility for. And think about bitterness. Somebody could legitimately sin against you, but if you let your heart sow a seed of bitterness and that
Mhm.
grow into that. I mean, that's your sin that you have to deal with. And I feel like that's
Mhm.
just totally off the table in the exvangelical conversation is personal responsibility for, for your part in things, even if you were wronged, even if that was the case, there's always something, darkness in our own hearts. But if we
Mhm.
reject the idea that humans are sinful, or at least that I'm
Right.
sinful or you're sinful, then that it's always going to be somebody else's fault, and there won't be
Mhm.
gratefulness, and there will be a lack of respect. Well, as we
Mhm.
come to the end of our time here, Anne, is there anything else that you want to say about this whole exvangelical phenomenon as you've seen it sort of happen on Twitter before we go?
Well, I hope that it's burning itself out. I mean,
Mm,
I hope that people are looking at it and thinking, "Oh, that looked great, but maybe it's not that maybe it's not that deep, maybe it's not that mature, maybe it's not that interesting. Maybe I could maybe the riches of the Christian faith are so vast that I
mm,
could spend some time investigating them before I just write the whole thing off just because I'm personally injured or I'm embarrassed about other Christians."
mm,
That would be one thing. And then I think the other thing is, if for real Christians, one of the marks of being a Christian is your acceptance of other Christians. One of the fruits, people want to talk about fruit checking all the time. If you're embarrassed by the church,
mm,
that's a bad fruit. You probably need to investigate that, because when Jesus calls us to love, he calls us to love one another and to accept one another. That's within the church. We're not supposed to just love the whole world or accept the whole world. You could love your neighbor. There's a lot of different layers of different kinds of love. But Christians are to love each other. And that means loving people you find uh, difficult and embarrassing, who may have hurt you even this last Sunday at church. That's the call of the Christian life. And if you love your fellow Christians, you are bearing good fruit and other people will be able to see it. And if you're not, then there you go fruit check. But the evangelicals trashing the church is a mark of their bad fruit.
mm. Amen. Wow. And by the way, for everybody who's listening, when the Bible talks about good fruit and bad fruit, it's not talking about feelings. It's not talking
Mm-mm,
about having peace, because it's not talking about being told
mm-mm.
something that makes you feel good, therefore that's good fruit. That the Bible talks
Yeah.
about good fruit by obedience to Christ is good fruit,
Hmm.
disobedience to Christ is bad fruit.
Hmm.
That's the New Testament language. And where can people connect with you online, follow your blog, follow you on social, all the things?
Well, I'm most often at Substack. If you just look for my name, but my Substack is called Demotivations with Anne, which I'm just trying to demotivate people from trusting themselves and
Mm.
loving themselves. That's the demotivation. I'd like to motivate you to believe in God, but I like the word demotivation. So you can find me there many days a week, and I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I blog at Pathos at Preventing Grace, and then the Stand Firm blog. And I am online too much. That's one of the things. Looks like
Yep. Are you there? Oh, did you freeze?
I freeze.
Okay, hang
I'll
on.
pause for a little bit.
But you actually ended that fairly well. You said,
Okay.
"I'm online way too much."
Oh,
And
that's it.
then
That's all I
and then
said,
it
and
was
then I
perfect. Okay. All right,
okay.
so I'll go to our closing, and then we'll do Patreon real quick.
Mhm.
Well, I want to thank my guest, Ann Kennedy. What a joy to have a conversation with her today. Make sure you go follow her, sign up for her blog. I subscribe. It's like $5 a month. It's super reasonable, and you just get so much great information. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe, hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. If you're listening on audio platforms like Google, Apple, or Spotify, you guys have put in so many amazing reviews. I am so grateful to the thousands of people who have left great reviews, and that really helps fine-tune that algorithm. It gets the news out. It gets these episodes out into the news feeds of more people. So I'm so thankful for that. If you haven't done that, I'd like to invite you to do that. Leave a review on one of those platforms. And it always helps if you share this on social media, or if you even see it go by in someone else's feed. If you just click like, leave a comment, all of that helps to get this information out to more people. And let's remember that as we pursue Christ, let's keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin.
So pray for me and I will pray for you. No turning right or left, we'll make it through. It's gonna be